everyone, welcome to our channel, Rebecca Stu and the Crew. I'm Rebecca, and today we have some DIYs for you guys for fall using items from the Dollar Tree. I'm so excited to show you how to use these. Let's go over our supplies for the first thing we're going to make, which is this fall sign. We're going to use various different signs and wood planks from the Dollar Tree. Today we're going to be using the dry erase house sign for our first project and some window clings. I chose this sheet from Dollar Tree. We'll need one sheet of printer paper, some twine, or some yarn. We're going to use these seeds that come, they look like little pumpkins. They come with the pine cones. We'll need some raffia and some different beads of your choice. Also some scrapbook paper. And then we are going to use some Mod Podge and a sponge brush or paintbrush. We'll need some scissors and something to write with. So the first thing we're going to do for project number 1 is we are going to lay our dry erase board house on top of our scrapbook paper and just trace around it with your pencil and then cut it out with your scissors. Now this is going to be a little bit too big because we just traced around the outside, and this does have a frame around it that has about a 1/2 inch deep edge there, so it's going to be just a tad bit bigger. So I just trim it up a little bit around the edges, and then I lay it right on top of the sign and I mark where the frame is at, and I just kind of push on it with my finger, and I'm able to get this crease along the side to start trimming it down. Once I got the sides done, I can push it inside the frame and then just work the bottom portion where I need to remove that little bit of a border. So always take off less. You can go back in and take off more if you need to. Just be patient with it. Once you have that trimmed down to size, you'll just take some Mod Podge and a paintbrush or a sponge and just fill in the center of your dry erase board. And then you can lay on your scrapbook paper and make sure you rub from the center out to get all the bubbles out. So now I chose to use this window cling right here that says Hello Autumn. I'm going to cut it off of the backing. And then I'm going to leave a little bit of the border around the sign here, just because I want to layer this onto the printer paper, because the window clings, of course, are a little bit see-through. And I want that white backing, but I don't want this really thick white backing that it comes on. I want to be able to glue it down to make sure it doesn't peel up over time. So I'm just going to trim around the window cling and then cut it out with some decorative scissors on the printer paper. I got these scissors at the Dollar Tree. They sell them in different varieties all year. Then we will trim off that little bit of excess we left on the window cling to make it smaller, and that way we have a little bit of a layered effect with the paper. So we'll peel the window cling off of that thick backing, as you can see how see-through that is, and then we'll just take some Mod Podge and put that on the printer paper and then layer our window cling on top, making sure to get all the bubbles out. And then we'll decide where we want to put it for our sign there. Once you figure out where you're going to want it to be, add some more Mod Podge to the back of your window cling and the paper that you've layered, and then place that inside of your framed house. And again, you work from the center out to make sure you don't have any bubbles. While that's drying, we'll start working on some decorative accents. So I have this yarn from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to put a button at the top of this to hold it together. You could just use another bead. You could use a knot. You don't have to have a button. I just thought it would look cute. It was just an optional material. Once I have the button done at the top, I'm going to take a little tiny bit of tape and tape the ends of my yarn to make sure they don't come apart while I put the beads on the string. I'm going to use a larger dark blue bead, a natural colored bead, orange, and then this light blue, and these were all purchased at the Dollar Tree. Once I have all 4 beads on, before I tie the end, I'm going to slide them up and then hold them where I'm going to want them on my sign, push the beads up to where I want them to lay, and once I figure out the spacing, then I'm going to take my yarn, go around the bottom bead, and then fish the yarn right back up through that hole so that the string loops around the bead and basically is tying it in place. And then you can tie another knot if you want to, though it's not necessary. and cut the excess off with your scissors. And then you'll do the exact same thing to the other side. Whenever I do beads like this, I always like to have one side a little bit longer than the other, so they're staggered when they are on the sign or whatever I put it on. I just think it looks nicer that way. So it's really up to you if you like yours to look that way or not. But the second side is going to be a tad longer than the first side. So I have both sides done now, and then we can just attach this to our sign with some hot glue. I'm just going to attach it up in the corner here. And as you can see, one side's just a tiny bit longer than the other side with the beads. I just like the way it looks better. Now I'm taking some raffia. I have about 4 pieces tied together in the middle. And this is just going to help me hold it together while I tie it again into a smaller piece. I just make it a knot. And then I'll cut that first knot off and fluff it up just a little bit. Now that knot is going to help me be able to glue this on without burning myself. It just makes the raffia a little bit thicker, and it makes a really nice decorative edge in the corner. So we'll add some hot glue to the corner and then push the raffia down into the corner there. So we have a little bit of raffia up the side and along the bottom. And once that's glued down, if you need to trim it up or add any more raffia, you can do that. I like to fluff it up and just see how it looks, trim it if I need to, and clean up any hot glue strings and any loose raffia that fell. Then I'll take my hot glue and glue these little seeds that look like pumpkins in the corner. And I have 3 of them. I'm just going to layer them. So these come over by the rocks and things that they have at Dollar Tree. There's little bags of rocks and stones. That's where I usually find these, and they're in a bag of pine cones, and they are, I think, pumpkin spice scented. You could also pick them up in a full-size bag of just these seeds that look like pumpkins at Joann Fabrics. So this is it. This is all we are doing to this one. I just love how this looks. I love that you can create these cute signs with window clings and just kind of think outside the box with them. You don't have to put them on a window. And it kind of gives you that vinyl look without having to use a cutting machine. So now for our second project, we're going to use a wood plank and one of the wall creation stickers from Dollar Tree, and then one of their wedding signs, the arrows that say gifts. They have a bunch of different ones as well. It doesn't matter what it says. We'll need some ribbon, again, some beads. I'm going to use the wood beads from Dollar Tree, some twine, and then you'll need some scissors and some hot glue. I'm also going to use some Mod Podge and a sponge brush and some white chalk paint and a paintbrush. So let's get crafty. This one's really easy to do. My kitten is helping out. This is Monchi-Chi. We rescued him a few months back. He's 4 months old now, and he is huge for his age. He just went to the vet today and got some more of his vaccines, and he's doing really, really well. So we are going to paint this sign with some white paint. He was really wanting to attack that paintbrush, but he was able to contain himself. Lucky for me, he was sleepy. So we just paint the whole top of this white. And then once it dries, we're going to take some Mod Podge and we're going to just cover the whole top of it with a thin layer of the Mod Podge and a sponge. And even though the window or these wall creation stickers are sticky on the back, the reason I add the Mod Podge is I just don't want it to start lifting up over time. So we'll peel this off of the backing and then center it on the sign. I'm going to work slow because you don't want to accidentally fold the sticker over on itself. It's really hard to peel open if you do that. I love this little welcome sign because the leaves really remind me of the fall colors. So I think it's the perfect sign to set out on a shelf or the table for different corner display. I just love how it looks. So now that this is dry on the front, I'm just going to mark the back about how long this gift sign is for the back, so I know where to put my glue. And then I'm just going to attach this to the backing, and that will help us create this little stand. Now we'll decorate the front a little bit more. I have this really pretty leaf ribbon from Dollar Tree. We're just going to glue this to the front, and then we'll flip it over and we'll cut off any excess that we have and just glue this down. We'll do the exact same thing to the other side. leaving about 1/4 of an inch on the end. I'm trying to space it out the same on both sides. I didn't measure, I just kind of eyeball it to try to get the ribbon in the same spot. So now we're going to take a little bit of twine, and we're going to do the same thing we did for the other side. We're going to create this little dangling beads. I'm not going to add a button to the top of this one. I'm just going to tie it off. So I start by putting my first bead on. I loop that twine around and back through the top. So it's looped around the bead. And then I'll cut off the excess and put a tiny dot of hot glue at the bottom just to make sure it stays on. And then I'll fish the rest of the beads on. So I'll put all 6 beads on, and then I'll fold this in half and just create a little knot at the top, making sure I have 3 beads on each side. So if your twine starts to fray, you can add a tiny bit of hot glue to the end to help be able to get this through the beads without it coming off. Or again, you can add the just regular tape, like a small piece of transparent tape also helps. Sometimes the beads are too small in the center and you'll need to clear out some of the sawdust. That way you can get the twine through the center. As you can see here, I'm really having trouble getting it through this bead. It had a lot of like wood that they didn't clear out of the center. So now I have all 6 beads on, and then I measure them so that, or I kind of move the beads around so that I have, you know, them staggered. I take a measurement before I tie it off, and then cut off that excess twine and tie my loop at the top. And I'll do the exact same thing for the opposite side. So I'm just making a tiny little knot, and then we'll add these to the sides here with some hot glue. But before we do that, I didn't really like the coloring, so I'm adding a little bit of antiquing wax to these with a brush. And then once I have it brushed on, I use a damp rag to wipe off some of the antiquing wax. I just wanted a really thin layer on the beads just to give them sort of like an aged look, but not a stained look, if that makes sense. I felt like this color just helped to match the sign a lot better. And I'll do the second set. Once I have both of them done and they're dry, then we'll just attach them to the top of the sign on each side where the ribbon starts with some hot glue. And then I didn't really like the way the top of it looked, so I decided to make really small bows to put on each side. So I just create this little X pattern and then tie it with a piece of wire in the center. And then the tails that hang down, I'll trim them off. I just fold them in half and then cut them in a V shape to create these tiny little bows. And then we'll glue those to the top of the twine where we tied the knot. It just looked more finished with the bows on top. I just did not really care for them without the bows, so it's really just personal preference. And that's it. This one is super simple to make, and I just love how it turned out. Okay, so now for project number 3. The supplies we're going to need for this one will be one of these small framed signs from Dollar Tree, one of their chopping mats in the clear. We'll need some scrapbook paper, any one that you like will do, one of the window clings, and then some of their rub-on transfers. I'm also going to use some scissors and some glue and a pencil. So let's get crafty. So this one's pretty easy also. We are going to just remove the backing to this sign. We're not going to need it. It's got these little metal tabs in the back, so I just lift them up with a pair of scissors. I remove the backing, and then I use a pair of pliers to pull these little metal tabs out because we don't need them and I don't want them to be in the way. Takes a little bit of a tug to get them out. They're pretty far in there, but you can just toss those. Now taking that backing that you removed, lay that on top of your cutting mat and just trace around it with a pencil. And then you'll want to cut this out with your scissors. So I always check the sizing before I move on because I don't want to have a bunch of stuff on it and then find out that I have it too large and I need to recenter everything. So now I'm choosing a window cling. I didn't feel that it needed anything behind it because it's a little bit darker in color. And then I start putting these rub-on transfers. They're like these different fall leaves and things on these sheets of rub-on transfers that Dollar Tree has out right now. They had the same ones out last year, so I hope y'all are able to find them. They just started putting them out a few weeks ago. So I just use a bunch of different leaves around the sign, and I cut them out and get them all placed where I want them to be before I start to transfer them onto the plastic. It's okay if some of your transfer hangs over the edge. I actually think it looks nice when it hangs over the edge. You can remove the excess once you pull that protective sheet off of the top. It comes right off, but then when you put it in your frame, it'll go right up to the edge and it just gives it a really nice finished look. So here's all 4 corners done, and then we'll put it in our frame just to check it out. Once we figure out that that's the way we like it, then we'll add some hot glue to each corner and then place that plastic sheet in the frame. And then you can leave it this way if you like. I wanted to add more detail to it, so I'm going to use this small sheet of scrapbook paper, and I'm going to put this behind that clear piece so that I have a little bit more of a decorative background. I check sizing, and then I just put glue in the 4 corners and put in the paper. So here's what it looks like so far. And then just to add a tad bit more detail, I have one of these wood stickers from Dollar Tree that they had out the last few years. I had some extras. I stained it, and then I just glue it to the corner. And now for our 4th project, the supplies we're going to need for this one will be one of these signs. I'm going to use the love and laughter sign. We're going to use the window clings, some rub-on transfers, and that we'll need one of these mini razor blades and a wet wipe. So let's get crafty. This one's really simple. All we're going to do is start removing this top portion of this sign. I found these about a week or so ago at the Dollar Tree. I love what they say. I actually purchased 2. I have one for my daughter, and then this one I bought for myself to craft with. So we're just going to remove that top portion of the paper, the shiny part. Once we have that off, I just take an emery board and I go over the top to rough it up a little bit. And then as I started to wipe off the dust with a wet wipe, I noticed that this was kind of like balling up and coming off really easily. It wasn't like real saturated or very wet, but it was coming off so easy that I decided to just keep rubbing it off with my fingers. And then I used the wet wipe to finish removing it, and it all came off the back really easily. And then I didn't have to add any paint or anything to the background, so I just really liked the natural wood look to it. Now I'm going to add some Mod Podge to the backing. I'm just using a bath sponge that I use from Dollar Tree. I cut them up into pieces, and then I'll center the window cling right in the center. Make sure there's no bubbles. And then take some more of those rub-on transfers from Dollar Tree. Pick out the ones that I want and then just layer those all around the sign. And again, you can have your window cling, those rub-on transfer pieces, as you put them on the window cling, go ahead and let them hang off the side, sometimes even wrap around the side of the frame, and it just helps it give it a finished look, and it looks like it's been decorated all the way around. It looks really pretty. I didn't add any more Mod Podge to the top of this or anything. I didn't feel like it needed it. I just like the very simplistic design of this. I hope you guys like it too. So now for our 5th craft that we're going to do, the supplies we're going to need will be, again, these little wood planks. And then we're going to use the window clings. We'll need some scissors and some glue, some paint of your choice, also a paintbrush. And then I'm going to use these building blocks from the generic Jenga game to create our stand. So let's get crafty. So for this one, we're going to pick our window cling out, and then I'm going to trace around it with a pencil. So I wanted to paint the border of this, and I don't want to paint the darker color underneath of the window cling because, again, they're see-through and this one's a little bit lighter. So I want to make sure that the lighter color is underneath of the window cling. That's why I'm tracing around it with my pencil. So I'm just marking the center, so when I put the window cling on, I'll be able to center it properly. You find the center of the window cling by just folding it in half. So now I'll paint. I chose to use the color celery to paint the border. I really like how it matches the socks in the corner of the window cling that we're going to use. I didn't do the border of the sign, I just did the face of it. I didn't bother the back just because it has this really pretty natural wood look, and I didn't think it needed all the extra paint. So I'm just doing the frame, and then I'm using a white paint to put underneath of the where the window cling will go. So once I had the white paint on, I just used what was left on the brush to do a dry brush technique around the edges. I wiped the excess off with a damp wipe, and then I took a tiny little bit of antiquing wax on a dry brush, and I just add a little bit of that to the edges of the frame to give it an aged look. Now that that has dried, we're going to add some Mod Podge to the sign where the white paint is at, and then we will add the window cling. I'm just checking to make sure I know where the center of this wood piece is at. It started to get covered up with the paint, so it's a little bit hard to see. So I just double check my work to make sure I have this centered. And then we attach this to the sign. Again, work from the center and work your way out towards the edges to make sure you don't have any bubbles underneath. So once we have this down, I let it dry for a few minutes, and then I start adding my decorative details to the sign. So I'm going to take some twine and wrap a little bit of this around each side. And after I had the twine on, I decided to use some of those rub-on transfers with the fall vines and some leaves and things around where the twine's at, just to kind of tie it all together. It looked a little, I don't know, kind of plain to me on the edges. It just didn't feel finished, so that's why I add some of the rub-on transfers. I didn't tie this at all, I just glued it on the back, and then I used some more of the wood blocks to create these little stands. I notice sometimes if you use just the building block and put that right on the back, sometimes the top of the sign, depending on how big it is too top heavy and it still wants to topple over. But if you can get it just a little bit away from the backing by using these smaller blocks, it helps to steady it and then they don't fall over. So that's why I built the stand in this way. And as you can see, I added some of those transfers around the twine. I have some extra leaves and things. Now for craft number 6, the supplies we're going to need are some of these smaller wood planks. We'll need the building blocks and some hot glue and some scissors. We're going to use some rub-on transfers and one of the window clings, some paint, and a paintbrush. So let's get crafty. The first thing we're going to do is just paint the small wood plank. I'm just going to paint mine white because, again, you can see through the window cling and I don't want to be able to see the wood grain through it. And I am using a light color, so I won't have to layer this window cling on any paper. So first I just do a very thin layer of paint on the small wood plank, and I do need it to dry because I'm going to be using the rub-on transfers, and if the paint is a little bit wet, they will not transfer onto the wood. So I'd give it about 10 minutes, or you can dry it with a hair dryer, and then you can apply your rub-on transfer. So I chose to use these really pretty pumpkins on a vine. I'm going to put those down at the bottom first. I'm making a little tiny sign, which you could use on like a tiered tray. Another option would be, instead of putting a stand on the back of this, you could use some magnets and use these as refrigerator magnets, which would be really cute. You could even put them on a bulletin board or like a dry erase board that's magnetic. So add some Mod Podge to your window cling, then add that to the sign. And then I'm just going to layer a few more of the rub-on transfers around it to help incorporate them all together and give layers. And then I use an orange paint marker to add a little bit more detail to this little sign here. I think this would make a really cute magnet. But again, I'm going to make a small stand. I'm just going to glue it to the back, and that's it for this one. Very simple. Now, our last one, which is my absolute favorite, the supplies we will need will be one of these large wood pumpkins from Dollar Tree. I'm going to print out this printable from the internet and some decorative rope. We'll just need a small piece. I'm going to use one blue leaf from Dollar Tree and some of these faux leather leaves. I'm going to use 2 of those. I'll need some of the berry garland and then some twine. Also need some scissors and some hot glue. And then I'm going to use these dog nail clippers. You'll see what for. And then some Mod Podge and a sponge brush, some paint and a paintbrush. And then we'll need some blue paint with a smaller detail brush, a pencil, and then these thumbtacks. We're just going to need 2. We'll need a small piece of faux leather. I'm going to use the brown. So let's get crafty. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go on the internet and we're going to type in sweater texture. And then these images pop up. We're going to pick the large images and just see more images. We're going to scroll through until we find that one that we like. I really like this blue one. So I'm going to take a screenshot. I just clip it and then save it. And I saved it as like blue sweater material or something like that, and hit save. And then you can print it on your printer. I printed mine on cardstock. If possible, I really highly recommend it. So we have this really pretty blue sweater. It looks so realistic. And then we're just going to lay our pumpkin on top of the cardstock and trace around it. And then we will start cutting this out. Now, of course, we're going to need to cut it a little bit more because the pumpkin is larger than the sheet of paper, and we still have these white lines around it. So once we have the initial part cut out, we're going to lay the pumpkin on top and move it past the white line and then trace around it again. And then you'll cut the lines out there around the border. And it's still going to be a little bit big on the top and the bottom. So we lay it on top of our pumpkin, and then we just trace a border at the bottom and the top because we're going to want to see a little bit of that wood grain around the whole sweater piece. And once we have it the right size, then we'll set that aside and we will paint the border of our pumpkin. I'm going to paint mine with this off-white paint. It's called Plaster. And I don't want to do too much paint because I don't want to saturate the wood. It starts to warp a little bit because it's thin. I don't want to get it too wet. And I am going to use Mod Podge in the center. So I'm just using my paint on the border. So now I take a piece of that rope and I'm using it while the paint is wet just to create these little imprints in the paint to give some extra detail. So as you see, I'm just like pushing the rope down into the paint, and it's making these tiny little lines and marks in the paint to give us the extra lines of the pumpkin. So while that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and add the cardstock with the sweater printed out on it. I'm going to use quite a bit of Mod Podge on the back of this. I have a nice thick cardstock, so I am not worried about using too much Mod Podge. We don't want to go crazy with it, but you can be pretty generous with it for the cardstock. Once I have that covered, I'll just center it to the middle of our wood pumpkin that we just painted. And then rub from the center out. Make sure you have all your bubbles out. And you'll want to let this dry for a little while. Once it's dry, I'm just taking a really small detail brush with the tiniest bit of blue paint, and I'm painting over those textured marks that we made with the rope. So the white paint underneath is dry now, so we can add just these little details to where the rope was imprinted. I just love how it gives the extra detailed lines to the pumpkin. Once I have the detail lines in, again, I just use the smallest amount of paint on a brush. It's practically dry. And then I just go very lightly around the edges and around the white part of the pumpkin to add just tiny little hints of blue. I didn't want a ton of blue paint on the edges. I like the white border, but I did want a little bit of blue. It just kind of gives it this shadow type look and helps to round out the edges of our pumpkin and not look so flat. And then we'll do the stem as well. Just add some little details. If you mess up on the stem, I actually did mess up. I added what I thought was a little bit too much blue. So I went back in and added some extra white when I was done with it. Okay, so while that's drying, we're going to cut out our faux leather to make a tag. And I'm going to use the Welcome rub-on transfer from Dollar Tree. And I'm going to put that right in the center of our tag. I love that these transfers will transfer onto this faux leather. I think it looks so pretty when it's done. It takes a little bit of work to get it on. It doesn't transfer as easily as it does to like wood or glass, but you definitely can get it to transfer onto the faux leather. Just take your time. If you lift up a little bit at a time, you start to see it peeling up. Just put your transfer sheet down and go back over it. Here's what it looks like so far. So now that our sign is mostly dry, we're going to take our tag and we're going to attach it with just a tiny bit of hot glue on both sides. So I glue the one edge down and then I flip it over on the other side and add a little bit more glue to the opposite side. I'm not too worried about the center. I don't want to add too much hot glue because it wrinkles this leather. So you want to add just a tiny little bit, especially if you don't have a low temp glue gun. Okay, so now that it's glued down, we're going to add some faux nails by taking these thumbtacks and these dog nail clippers, which are perfect for cutting these. So you just want to cut some of the stem off. Now what you want to do is put your finger or your hand over top of it while you cut it so it doesn't fly up and hit you in the eye. So see how I just lay it down and then cut it with my hand over top of it. Please do it that way. I don't want anyone getting hurt. So now we've got just a tiny little bit of that pointy part left, and it's just enough to stick through the leather and the wood without going all the way through the back. And I don't add any additional glue or anything to hold this on. It holds it on just fine, just the way it is. And it pushes right into the wood and the leather. As you can see, it lays really flat and it's not through the back at all. And now we can finish decorating our pumpkin. So we have these berries. I put those on first and I didn't really like where they were at, so I ended up taking them off and changing it, which you'll see here in a minute. But we're just going to glue these faux leather leaves to the pumpkin. I love how they coordinate with the tag that we added to the bottom. So I'm just going to add 2 of the the faux leather leaves. And then I'm taking one of these blue leaves to tie it all together, and I'm going to tuck it between the 2 faux leather leaves here. And then I remove the berries, and I actually just wrap them around a pencil to curl them up. And then I fold it in half, and I use those as a vine that kind of curls down on each side of the leaves. And I just glue them on right in the center of the stem. And then I wanted to hide the ends of the leaves at the top. So I wasn't really quite sure what I was going to do. I didn't want to add any more leaves to it. So I ended up taking this blue and natural color twine that I picked up at Dollar Tree. I want to wrap this around 4 fingers about 6 times, and then you'll cut off the excess and cut off a piece to tie around the center. So you just gather it up in the middle and then fluff up your strings to make a bow, and then cut yourself a string to tie right in the center. You're just going to make a double knot. Before you really tie it tight though, make sure that you're right in the middle so that your loops are even on both sides. So fluff up your bow and then just cut off the excess little strands there. And then you can glue that right to the top and hide all the glue marks and the ends of the leaves. Now you can hang this if you like. I didn't want mine to hang. There's already a hole in the top. If you don't want to hang it, you can just cover that. I often use just masking tape and then just tape over it or paint over it. You can't even see it. I'm going to put mine on this old stand that I had from an old project that I didn't want to use it with. And I'm going to take this birch ribbon from Dollar Tree and just wrap this around the wood piece to make it look pretty much like a gift. You would wrap it just like you would a gift. But the only difference is we're attaching it with hot glue. As you can see, my cats are now wrestling on the table. They're so helpful. So now we're going to add some hot glue to the wood plank that we covered with the birch ribbon. And then I just glue this to the pumpkin, and I will stand it up before I make, I just want to make sure it's going to stand up flat. And then I push down to make sure it's well attached. So make sure you check it before you really push down and have it attached and then can't get it off. So as you see, I just wanted mine to stand, and I covered that hole at the top with a piece of masking tape and just painted over it. And here's some close-up shots so you guys can see what it looks like. I love how realistic that sweater looks. It is so pretty. This is definitely my favorite one out of all of the projects. And here are all the things we made today. This little house. Here's our welcome sign. And then our seasons change. Fall is in the air. And then our pumpkin. I hope you guys like learning how to use all of these items. Today, don't forget we do Dollar Tree videos on Tuesdays and Fridays, and our craft videos are on Thursdays. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And here are some other videos from our channel you might also enjoy. Have a great day, everyone.